Jimmy had already finished his portion, and now his only desire, as well as hers, was to get to bed as soon as possible and fall asleep. During this impromptu dinner, they kept egging each other on who would take the bathroom first to take a shower. They arrived in England this morning. We flew all night, plus a 6-hour time difference. Both she and her son had to sleep somehow, curled up in chairs, and after breakfast on board, they didn't want to eat at all. They got off at Gatwick Airport at 8 p.m. GMT. And here they were, finally in the bar of a cozy hotel in Stratford upon Avon, where she had booked a room by phone in advance. She had flown to England once before and knew from her own experience that it was better to immediately adjust to a new sleep regime, in order to adjust to the time difference as quickly as possible. So they squeezed into their rented micro-lee trap and conscientiously inspected castles, churches, and picturesque surrounding villages all day. Jimmy seemed to have come to terms with her dubious theory of perestroika. At least there was no whining about it. In general, his behavior turned out to be a pleasant surprise for her. She thought that after the divorce, he would prefer to live with his father, but he spent only a week with James, it was a month ago, after which he declared that he was staying with her. In a fit of joy, she decided to thank her son with this trip to England. It was only when it was too late to change anything that had occurred to her that a boy traveling around England alone with his mom would hardly seem such a cool idea. But he seemed genuinely pleased. And she decided that the mocking twinkle in his eyes about her enthusiasm was just a figment of her imagination. When they returned to the car to pick up their things, she marveled again at how much he had grown over the past 6 months, thin and already a whole head taller than his petite mom. How this new masculine strength of his arrived in time. She would clearly not be able to carry heavy suitcases alone. Okay, now quickly register and go to sleep. Go to sleep. Now the time difference has completely affected. She hardly understood what the receptionist was mumbling. Her ears felt like they were stuffed with cotton wool. Yes, you booked a room for 2. The last one is left. All the hotels and motels around are also occupied. It's the height of the season. Why repeat the obvious things? And why was he looking at her and his son so strangely? Indeed, they will live in a common room, but they will change clothes in the bathroom, and everyone has their own bed. They are, after all, mother and son. She continued to nod mechanically. Okay, good, until the desk clerk finally escorted them upstairs to their room, pausing at the door with a simple sign, toilet. He said that he would have to use it with other guests, but it was very close, just 2 doors from their room. Very convenient. Wait a minute. What kind of news is this? But I specifically asked for a room with a bathroom. She had already imagined how in the morning she would have to wait for her turn to wash up. Of course, Mrs. Mackenzie, you have a shower and a wash basin in your room. He seemed annoyed by her incomprehensibility. If you also wanted a separate toilet, you should have booked another room. We only have 2 rooms, with a toilet and a bathroom, and both are occupied now. These are old buildings. When they were built, there was no modern sewage system yet. Well, at least he'll have his own shower. The receptionist stopped at the door with the number 4. Well, here's your number. If you need anything, let me know. Breakfast in English is from 8 to 9:30. And he handed her the key. She opened the door and moved aside so Jimmy could bring in his things. Then she followed him and closed the door. Jimmy turned to her. There was a whole gamut of feelings on his face: confusion, embarrassment, and hidden joy. Mom. Looking around the room, she immediately understood why he was so confused. A small room, barely enough space to put the suitcases, and a double bed in the center, one for both her and her son. There is a shower stall the size of a phone booth in the corner, and in the opposite corner, next to the bed, there is a small sink and a mirror above. Liz Mackenzie sat down on the bed. There was nowhere else except for an awkward wooden chair, and covered her head with her hands and uttered despair. So that's why the desk clerk was looking at them so strangely. What should I do? Fortunately, she had brought only long-brimmed nightgowns with her, meaning that they would have to spend the night in the common room. And again, it was only now that she remembered how the British called such numbers. Of course, it was necessary to book not a double room, but a double room. In the shower room, she looked at it through her fingers. mentally praying that by some miracle everything would change. But no, not only is this not a separate room, but the walls are made of transparent plastic, and only out about the height of her waist is a decorative stripe and a flower glued, too low from above, too high from below. All the charms will be in the palm of your hand. The room was booked for 2 days. This thought finally finished her off, and the receptionist specifically emphasized that there were no other rooms available. Nowhere. They were silent for a while, not daring to utter a sound. Finally, Jimmy took a deep breath and was the first to dare to speak. "Mom, I know this is a nightmare, but it's not your fault. In my opinion, you just have to act naturally." "But well, yes, of course. But how to do it?" There was the sound of boots being kicked off. When she looked at him, Jimmy was already pulling off his shirt. "I'm the first one in the shower. I'm kind of uncomfortable, but you're my mom. I was born like this, wasn't I?" He giggled nervously. It was a joke, they say, and she smiled back at him, gratefully, blushing deeply. She looked up at his face. Jimmy did not look away, and again, she noticed that elusive expression flickered across his face. Along with embarrassment and surprise, he turned around and headed for the shower. As Jimmy closed the stall door behind him, he looked back once more, mentally cursing herself. She turned away and decided to unpack her suitcases. She piled the largest one on the bed and pulled out a nightgown and toiletries. "All right, that's enough. We need to distract ourselves, deal with the problem of arranging this room, think about plans for tomorrow, and about anything." Finally, she heard him turn off the shower and the stall door opened. "Mom, give me a towel, please." "A towel?" She looked back at him in disbelief, and only now noticed that there was no towel rack in the shower. Glancing nervously around the room, she found them by the sink on the other side of the bed. "I had to go around the bed again and get a towel." She turned to hand it to him. "Just calm down. Just calm down." Jimmy was facing her, smiling uncertainly. Having already taken a step towards him, she couldn't help but look at him. Her gaze immediately darted back to her face, but it was too late. She held out a towel, and as soon as he took it, she immediately turned away. It's best perhaps to just take it for granted. Underwear doesn't hide anything anyway and will behave naturally. Let's just remember that we are mother and son, and yet, even as she said those words, she already had a bad feeling. "Oh, I wouldn't get in trouble." She let go of Jimmy and straightened up. So modesty aside, Jimmy Mackenzie was sorting things out while managing to keep his eyes on his mother. "Okay, Jimmy, I'm tired of arguing and I'm terribly sleepy. So be it. I'll sleep in my underwear, just like you." She covered her eyes with her hand. She probably shouldn't have agreed, but she just doesn't have the strength to argue with him anymore. Her son turned back to the bed, so she didn't notice the twinkle in his eyes or the smile that flashed across his face. "Jimmy, there was no way we were supposed to sleep in the same bed." He turned over and turned on his side, preparing to sleep. Liz Mackenzie turns to her son, who is sleeping next to her. Fortunately, he never woke up, so she has time to recover. Liz relaxes and closes her eyes to get some sleep before Jimmy wakes up. She managed to doze off, but the incoherent thoughts and fragmentary images that flashed through her head did nothing to calm the itching in her body. "Good morning, son. It's getting light here early, isn't it?" He mumbled something in response. She had no doubt that Jimmy was currently torn between two conflicting desires. She couldn't hold back for long. After all, a man is already lying in front of her, not a boy. "After these my thoughts, they may love. But don't forget either, Mom, I'm your son." He smiled happily. When his mother couldn't find an answer and just looked at him helplessly, Jimmy correctly understood that victory was just around the corner. He just had to not scare off his mother and try not to awaken her again a sense of responsibility for what was happening. He doesn't even think to obey her. It is clear that Mom simply absolves herself of all responsibility for what is happening. They sit next to each other and are afraid to look at each other. Breathing is slowly returning to normal. "Jimmy," she stops in mid-sentence. She has nothing to say, and how can she express her feelings? They fall asleep. After this situation, they try not to talk about it. Now, this secret has remained with them for the rest of their lives.